The phone rings and you answer. You talk to your loved one, everything's fine, you hang up, and then almost immediately it rings again. Same person, same conversation, and repeat. If you have ever cared for someone with dementia, the particular kind of exhaustion that lives in that pattern, not anger, not resentment, just that bone deep weight of knowing the person you love is scared and the only thing that helps is your voice and you cannot always be there. Today's guest knows that weight. Her mother has dementia and it was just the two of them growing up, single parent, only child. She searched for something that could answer them in her voice with her warmth so that her mother never had to wonder if she had been forgotten. She couldn't find it, so she built it. My guest today is Kirstin Thomas, a co-founder and president of KindredMIND, a voice companion for dementia families that answers calls from a loved one with dementia in the caregiver's own voice. Welcome to From Guilt to Good. Hi, my name is Jeanette Yates. I'm the founder of the Caregiver, and I cared for my own mother for several decades and now help caregivers set boundaries and use simple tools that make care and life easier so they can feel good, not guilty. My guest today is Kirstin Thomas, a co-founder and president of KindredMIND. Before KindredMIND, Kirstin built and scaled a Canadian tech company that was acquired in 2024. She's a mother of three, and she is the daughter of a woman named Sharon, who calls looking for her voice and now always finds it. Kirstin, welcome to From Guilt to Good.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this conversation. And we always start on the podcast with that personal story. So I would love for you to tell me a little bit about you and your mom, how it was just the two of you growing up, and what does that relationship look like now?
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying with your intro, that specific weight of seeing all those calls coming through and not being able to field them all, that decision to build KindredMIND wasn't out of a boardroom. It wasn't out of, a strategy session. It was from lived experience. And this actually goes over across a few generations now also. But I'll dive into my relationship with my mom. And of course, as you mentioned, it's just always been the two of us, single child, single mom. So there's a particularly strong connection just inherent in that relationship, in that dynamic. So we were figuring out life together, and it was her world was mine and mine was hers. So there is that kind of codependency, and some would argue maybe enmeshment. I was always truly concerned about how she was doing, if she was okay. And so fast forward into now my adult life, I saw a slow burn for cognitive decline, and I was accepting of it. And I thought it would carry on with that trajectory. But it was a stroke in November of 2025 that accelerated the decline significantly, literally overnight. So we went from, living in the hospital for the entire month of November. What happened, the stroke actually affected her basal ganglia, which is a structure responsible for mobility, essentially, among other neurological functions. So it left her in a wheelchair. Her entire left side has no voluntary movement. So as you can imagine, coming from someone who was super independent, hustled boss lady, to one that was needing and very dependent now on all tasks, all daily tasks, she could no longer live independently. She lost that autonomy in that moment. So the decision was made. It was a difficult one, but a realistic one, to move her into a home that could meet those needs. So she is 20 minutes away, and I visit her almost every day. It was the in-between times that I started feeling more weight. So I would go from, fielding a few calls throughout the day to, as you said, 10 before lunch. So that just became a moment where it was one of those light bulb moments, because it brought me back to when I was in high school, fielding those calls from my grandmother. My mom and I would come home from our day and pick up those messages from the answering machine that played loud and clear for the whole household. And it signaled to me that my grandmother, from the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, was calling us repetitively, leaving those messages. And actually, sometimes what I noticed too was the outgoing recorded message kind of gave her some comfort. So she was actually having what she thought was a two-way conversation. So I revisited that moment in my high school years to present day. Now, as I'm fielding these calls, it was like Groundhog Day, these calls from my mom. And I literally physically couldn't get to every single call. And it was when I was, as I mentioned, this decision to build KindredMIND was made out of these instances of, I would be on the edge of sleep reaching for her call. I would be jumping out of the shower literally to take her call. I didn't want to leave her unanswered. My worry was that she would think that I had abandoned her because of our emotional connection. I was concerned that she thought that she would be wondering where I was, if I was okay, where she was, and if she was okay.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit more into what these calls really are, why they happen, and all of that. So I want to make sure that everyone listening, because a lot of our listeners are going through dementia, but some people maybe on the earlier side, and this hasn't happened yet. So I really want everybody to understand what is actually happening when this pattern starts, because a lot of people feel like this is like a behavior problem, like we can just manage it or we can just do something. And what you're describing is something different. So can you talk a little bit about, I think it's dementia separation anxiety, and how did learning to understand that, how did that change what you decided to build?
Yeah. So what's actually happening with those repetitive calls is there's a clinical name for it. And as you mentioned, it's the dementia separation anxiety. Once I understood what was happening on a neurological level, I approached the problem differently. See, the hippocampus is what stores those new memories. And with someone living with dementia, those short-term new memories are no longer stored. So after that call, after that feeling of reassurance, the fear or the anxiety, the disorientation resets immediately. And sometimes, upon hanging up, that will reset and the calls will come again and again. So it was when I understood, that this was not a behavioral thing. My mom wasn't calling to manipulate me or make me feel guilty. She was living in fear. She was scared. And so I looked at the alternative options. I was trying to figure out how can I reasonably answer every single call and make sure that the behavior her concerns, her emotion, the underlying emotion is being met. And sometimes we just can't get to every call. Let's be realistic. We all have careers, families to chase,
or need sleep, or to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say that the way I am kind of built is I was like, okay, I can do better. I can do this. I'll wake up earlier. I'll make sure that I've prepared everything in line so that I can get those calls. But then, that just depletes you, may build resentment in it. Okay. So I was looking at the options available to me.
I was just going to ask. So you had this problem. It was familiar to you because, you're dealing with this as an adult. You remember the same situation from high school and you're like, okay, I'm going to look for things that help with this. And what were some of the alternatives that other families try, like blocking the calls, taking the phone away?
So blocking the calls, silencing the calls, having them go to voicemail. What happens is the person living with dementia, they're sitting in fear. They're dialing the person that they know is their safe person. It's their person they have this connection with. So if they're feeling disoriented or they're just needing that familiar voice and they're being met with either a call block or a voice message, that fear has nowhere to go. It just sits and lands internally with that person and it compounds, because then they try the call again. And actually in some memory care facilities, what the staff have noted and what I've heard from feedback is that it causes agitation and then it almost spreads within the community of residents. So it becomes this thing that needs to be managed in their minds. So what I think historically has been done is we're managing the problem. So we take the phone away. But by taking the phone away, we're removing their only tool, their only lifeline to that familiar voice, to that loved one. And so once again, like I said, it just compounds. It's like layered. And then you're sitting feeling guilty for not having fielded all of the calls that you could have. And once again, you're only addressing the problem. You're not actually meeting the underlying emotion of the person living with dementia.
Well, and I think too, as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking my mom did not have dementia, but she was living on her own in an increasingly precarious situation. But she did not want to go into a nursing home, or assisted living. So we were doing the best we could. And so as her fear rose, those repeated calls would come in. And of course, this type of tool does not work for someone like my mom. She doesn't have dementia. She's not in cognitive decline. So I might be able to do something like, do not disturb or something like that when I need to sleep or be in a meeting, because she also had her emergency button, right? If there was a real emergency, but that doesn't work with people with dementia, especially as their disease progresses. So like even scheduling calls might work. Like they know you're going to call right after lunch or right before dinner, but eventually as their disease progresses, stuff like that doesn't even work.
Exactly. And actually, initially, that's how we started. My mom and I, prior to the stroke, we would have those. I saw the increased phone calls. She stopped texting, actually. And that was another clue. She stopped texting. She started phoning me. And she hadn't done that in like many years. And I started seeing that trend. And then, of course, the calls became, the higher volume and with more frequency, especially after the stroke. So yeah, to your point, the scheduled calls worked in the beginning, but that's only temporary because as we all know, and as your audience knows, it's a progressive disease.
Today's sponsor is Savvy Security. You know that low-grade worry that never quite goes away? Wondering if your mom is going to pick up the wrong phone call or click the wrong link when you're not there? That's exactly why Savvy Security exists. Savvy has built the first digital safety layer designed for families like yours, tools that help flag suspicious calls, texts, and online threats before they reach your loved one. It's not about taking away anyone's independence. It's about giving caregivers the peace of mind and giving people they love a quiet layer of protection in the background. To learn more and try their free tool ScamWise, go to savvysecurity.com. That's SAVI security.com. All right, so I want to stay here in this moment where we're talking about guilt. After all, the show's called From Guilt to Good. And what you're describing, that happens with us, even after we know, okay, this is that progression of the disease. I know they can't help it. So I'm trying to answer the phone, all of this kind of stuff. You've said that the guilt is a symptom too. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So it's not evidence that you're a bad caregiver. It's evidence that you love someone deeply. I think that guilt is one of those things that people don't talk about enough in caregiving because I think they see it as almost a confession. If you admit to guilt, then you're admitting to failure or wrongdoing. So I think inherently, because you're caring for someone so deeply, you want to do right by them. And so you feel guilty at every turn because in your estimation, you haven't met their needs fully, but the standard you're measuring yourself against is literally impossible because if your loved one is calling you 100 times a day, you just simply cannot get to every single phone call. So that's what I mean by it's built in to the package of anyone caring for someone with dementia, that that is a symptom too that falls on you. So to be fully present, to be functioning as a real human being and running after your kids and running a business, all of these things, you can't juggle all in fair equity. So I also wanted to talk about the relief component.
Right. I was going to say that there's a guilt that happens when you actually come up with a solution sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you feel, so you feel relief when the phone stops ringing, and then you feel guilty for feeling the relief that you felt relief. So it's like this vicious kind of cycle. So I think what it's signaling is that relief is actually, if you're feeling relief, it's your nervous system saying that you're depleted. I was finding that I would hear like crinkling from like a candy wrapper and I would freeze up. So the guilt is because you love someone deeply, because you've been asked the impossible. And if the guilt goes unchecked, then you become less present, as we all know, and the harder days get even harder. And that when you're showing up to see your loved one, you're carrying the baggage of that guilt, which is unhealthy physically and mentally and spiritually. And you're no longer present. And the person, although they may have dementia, they feel that internal conflict, that tension. So I would say that from the people that I've spoken to, the ones that have cared for loved ones for a long time, that they understand their boundaries, they understand their limitations, and they understand too how to negotiate and reconcile that they can't be there 100% of the time. So allowing yourself to adopt tools or methods or strategies, what have you, is actually doing a service to yourself, of course, but then in turn helps out the person that you're caring for, because you show up You show up and you're more present.
That was something that I really had to wrap my head around when I was trying to figure out, like, okay, I can't keep doing what I'm doing in caregiving because either I'm not going to physically make it or my life is going to fall apart. Like my kids, my husband, like all this stuff. And so like knowing that I couldn't keep going this way and then being forced to look for solutions, there was this sense of, okay, now I've got to find these solutions, and then get my mom on board and all of this kind of stuff. But there was that relief that happened. But I think it's also really important to talk about the fact that, like, if you feel guilty, chances are you're probably doing a pretty good job. I've had people come on and talk about compassion fatigue. And like, there's this whole, I'll link that episode so people can watch it. But the gist is, if you have compassion fatigue, it means you have compassion. It's kind of, like, you can't have compassion fatigue if you don't have any compassion.
Because if you're indifferent, then you don't care, then you're not feeling guilty. So I think you've said it exactly how it is. If you feel guilty, then it's a true indication of how deeply you care for that loved one.
Right. Now I want to hit on one more thing pre-KindredMIND. So before you created KindredMIND, you're dealing with these calls. You are not answering some already. And that brings up its own kind of stress for you, because on the one hand, you're like, she's just going to ask me the question she asked me 5 seconds ago. And but then there's the other part of you, or this is a real emergency. Like, I know that was my thing. Cause like, I was able to set some boundaries with my mom. Like, okay, I'm only going to talk to you this, or don't call after XYZ unless it's an emergency. Like, I'm still getting calls every night after 9 p.m. So there was this, this wondering that happens, like, okay, this call could be this just a repeat, or there could be something wrong. Is she okay? How is she feeling that I can't answer the phone? Before you created KindredMIND, which we're going to get into next, what did that feel like for you?
Oh my gosh. I was gutted, because I also feel like I think the world is coming to an end at every turn. So I'm wired to worry, and I'm like, what if this is the call? Or so, I mean, that was really the impetus. Like, I need to understand every single call is managed, but also that if I am missing a call, that any concern is addressed in real time. So yeah, I mean, you said it precisely. The weight of those missed calls just sat with me. I couldn't even concentrate on my work, on my day, because my mind is elsewhere the whole time, thinking, what did I miss? How is she doing? Is she okay? Does she feel like I have abandoned her? Does she worry about me? So yeah, I mean, it's better to just get the calls so that you can put your mind at ease and get back to work, but you can't get to every single call, especially if you're in a meeting or being recorded on a podcast.
Okay. So yeah, I just, I was thinking about that too, with how, like, I always dealt with, like I said, different experience. My mom did not have dementia, but we would have these, things where, like, I just, like, in my case, I would tell her, like, I'm not going to answer the phone after 9 p.m. So like, it was a different situation for me. And, we talked about, like, what she needed to do if there was an emergency, because the firemen would call me. Does that make sense? So like, they would call, but like, there were so many times where, like, she would call or text, and like, I could see the text and know it wasn't an emergency, but she was still like texting. And I would feel so guilty, because I'd be like, like, I'm trying to set this boundary with her so that I can get a break and not have to do this, so that I can focus on my family for the evening or whatever. And it was always that weight of just like, she's lonely. She's not having an emergency, but she also is lonely. And like, just trying to figure that out and navigate that and trying to make sure you're doing the right thing is so hard. And I cannot imagine. I mean, I know how hard it was for me.
It breaks my heart. It does.
But then, like, to know somebody doesn't know the difference.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, even the concept of time, like, the concept of time, there is none.
Yeah. So like, that added, like, I didn't even have that added layer, and it was still hard and complicated. So like, I can't imagine. Okay, so now we get into it. I want to understand what you've built at KindredMIND, and I know that you have a great way of explaining it. that makes sense. And so I don't want to mech it up. I'm going to let you tell us, walk me through what KindredMIND does. Like, what does your mother experience when she calls and you can't get to the phone? What happens?
Yeah. So now when my mom calls and I can't get to the phone, KindredMIND answers. So it will answer in my voice. So there's that familiar voice technology. It's not a recording saying, generic things. It has a relevant conversation with her based on information that I would upload into the dashboard, the family members' names, the dogs' names, the rhythms of her day, of my day, mealtime, all of those things that would be pertinent and relevant to her world. And those conversations that I can't get to are met the way I would want them to be, met with warmth, with patience. And this is all based on 3 pillars. So we've built KindredMIND with the validation therapy.
Yeah. So go into that about validation therapy, because I think a lot of people don't understand this very well.
Right. So it was developed by Naomi Fail, and it was in 1960, and it's actually been clinically tested throughout the decades. So it's something that specialized memory care workers fall to and use as their main way of managing these repetitive and sometimes outlandish comments. For example, am I going to see my mom today? Meaning this is coming from my mother, whose mother, my grandmother, is obviously no longer here. You don't correct them and say, oh, she's dead. She's been dead, 30 years now.
Don't you remember?
Yeah. Or you don't say, in the case of these repetitive calls, you don't say, Mom, you just called me 5 minutes ago and we just had the exact same conversation. You meet them where they're at and you try to dig deep with empathy and you look at the root cause of the call. They're not really calling to find out, that nitty gritty detail about like the time of their meal, or so you're never correcting. You're just meeting them where they are. And you can redirect gently if it's one of those conversations that will trigger like really deep seated emotions, but you're reassuring, you're offering love and words of comfort, and that everything's okay, and that you're planning to come and see them again. So that's the nature of the call based on that validation therapy. The simulated presence therapy is another pillar that KindredMIND is based on, and that goes to say that it's that familiar voice technology. So it's simulating my voice. And back in the day, they would use, and there's studies to show that the recorded messaging of a familiar voice, a loved one, would ease that anxiety. It would calm them, and they would then see less escalated behavioral issues, of course, alongside, proper dementia related care. But instead, KindredMIND does something more. Instead of just having that recorded voice, you're having a 2-way, as I mentioned, conversation in that familiar voice for them.
Well, and I want to just, for the people, because I love technology, you and I bonded over like the love of technology. But, when you're talking about the simulation and how it's using your voice, and the knowledge base is based around things that you've talked about. And we're going to talk about setup in a minute, but I just wanted to remind everyone that, when you're going to your normal chatbot that is out there in the world, your ChatGPTs, your Geminis, everything, that knowledge base is like all of the internet. What Kirstin is talking about is a knowledge base based on what you've told it about. So explain how the knowledge base is different than.
Yeah, so there's a dashboard custom to you and your loved ones. So it will prompt you with those pertinent questions that you can that KindredMIND can use in conversation, anywhere from your family member names to memories that your loved one loves to revisit. For example, my mom had amazing experiences traveling, so I often tried to sprinkle in little memory nuggets of her travels across the world, things like that. But of course, there's concerns over privacy, so we do not allow or accept medical information. No financial details are submitted. It's not permitted. Last names addresses, all of those things are not part of the equation. They're not part of the dashboard, but it's everything that the caregiver wants to share.
Yeah. So like I just wanted to let them know that like the knowledge base is very narrow versus,
it's
this
personalized.
Yeah. So very, very personalized. So just when, I use the word knowledge base all the time. And like, even I was talking to my husband about something with his business the other day, and I was like, what knowledge base? And he was like, what? And like, we had to just, he knew what I was talking about, but I was just using a different term. Right. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
So in this case, it's just like it's a little bubble of information.
Yeah, it's like just a little box of keepsakes of things that you talk about. Just like
I love that. Yeah, I like that.
So speaking of, we are kind of already talking about this, but let's go into, because I know caregivers are already like, I need this right now. Tell me about the setup process though, because that's one of the things that like, we don't got a lot of time to deal with this. How does this work and how does it learn my voice?
Right. So the setup process is a lot simpler, I think, than families may anticipate. So you work with an AI specialist named Sarah, and you go through 3 short sessions, each about 7 minutes in length. And it's like a phone call. So she'll ask you a question, and it's just almost like a two-way conversation. And from that airtime, your voice gets, I don't know technically how it all works, but it becomes cloned. And the longer the airtime, of course, the more professional it becomes, to a point where it's indistinguishable. And again, so once that voice has been obtained through that conversation, the information through that conversation gets actually pre-populated in that knowledge base, and then you can fine tune it. So it's kind of great that way, because it does 2 things at once. It collects your voice, but it also inputs information to that base to pull from.
Yeah. So it's a little bit longer, but that's so that it can learn your voice. You want the conversations to be 7 minutes, so that you're having using a lot of words, your tonality is changing and things like that. And that's just going to make the voice clone better. So whereas filling out the dashboard might not take as long or whatever,
Right. No. And like I said, part of the answers in your conversation get pre-populated in the form anyway. So it's more efficient.
Today's sponsor is Savvy Security. You're probably looking out for 2 generations right now. Your parents on one side and your kids with digital devices on the other. And both of them are getting scam calls and texts that didn't exist 5 years ago. Savvy was built exactly for households like yours. One family plan covers everyone: parents, teens, and you. Savvy is real-time protection against AI-powered scams before they reach the people you love. You can have greater peace of mind for just $7.99 a month. That's $7.99 a month for coverage of unlimited family members. Savvy is live in the App Store and Google Play. Details at savvysecurity.com. That's SAVI security.com.
Yeah. So I want to address this directly because it deserves a direct answer, and it's a really good question. My mom hears a voice companion that sounds like me, but she doesn't know the difference. So I looked at the alternatives. The alternative would be that she understands that she's talking to a voice companion, but and can make an informed decision, but her brain can't hold on to that anyway. Or I could, send her call to voicemail, leave it unanswered, or I could answer the call, every call, and then she would start hearing the resentment or the impatience or the frustration or the hurried voice. So every memory care professional has been trained specifically for this. And we talked about, you meet them in their reality, you don't correct them. So like the literal truth isn't always the compassionate truth. And I love that saying, because again, you don't want to correct to upset. So in my way of, after having given this a lot of thought, it's not deception, it's care.
My mom did go through the last 6 months of her life. She started losing her cognitive ability. So I did have a brief period of time where, she would say, "Have you told mama I'm in the hospital?" And of course, my grandmother died, in 2008 or something. And I would say, "Oh yeah, I did." I validated that. And so to your point, that is a little bit of a deception, right? That is a little bit of shifting things so that she can just move on to the next thought she's going to have, or, whatever. She tasked me at one point during this time with the 2 children that were left in her care when she was on a train ride that she wasn't on. And somebody gave her these children to take care of. And could I please take care of them while she took a nap, of course, these kind of things. And I do also love what you said about like the voice your mom is hearing is your voice as close as it can be. And it's the best, it's the calmest, it's the warmest version.
But you're weighing the two options. You're weighing this voice companion or you're choosing to not answer. So it's what's the worst evil in my way of looking at this. And I don't see it as a trick. She ends every call feeling reassured. And yes, it resets. But I think that when before KindredMIND, when I was leaving calls going unanswered, they would come with more frequency. And by the time and urgency, and by the time I would answer, it sounded like she ran a marathon. She was like exasperated. And I can only imagine the fear that she was sitting in, all those calls. Yes, for all those calls that went unanswered. So in this case, it's one of those things you have to measure.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, what you're describing brings calm to her and calm to you. And that is a positive outcome moving in your relationship, right? As you continue, mentioned at the beginning, this is progressive. This is only going to get weightier. There's going to be more that you have to carry. And so the more times that you can produce a positive emotion feeling with her and her nervous system and in yours, the better you're going to be able to show up as her daughter, as her caregiver, all of those things. And this is a whole nother episode entirely. But, I talk a lot about consent and autonomy when using caregiver tools. But I also recognize that at some point, especially when you are having to take over for their care anyway. So, you have the power of attorney and you're doing all these other things. I think this is a similar situation. You're not advocating someone just using this if they're annoyed with their mom who doesn't have any problem.
Oh, no. And I want to make that clear. This is not to replace you. And I would never want someone to use it for that purpose. This is to amplify your voice, literally, when you physically cannot get to the call. But try to make every call, but also try and have a life yourself.
Right. And I think I saw you sent me a video today, which I will link in the episode description of kind of how this works a little bit. And I do believe that the first part of it was your clone voice. Was it?
No, it was actually me.
Oh, well, so it sounded great.
We do have online exactly that. So you can see my voice in real life compared to my voice after a few minutes, compared to my voice once I've given it more airtime. So you can see the progression of enhancement.
But one of the things that was in the video was it showing how you just, when you're going into a meeting or want to take a nap or got to go to the bathroom or in a recital or, whatever, you open up the app and just slide like.
Yeah, there's a toggle mode. So you can say cover for me and that'll go straight to KindredMIND. You can also have a mode where you're like, yeah, no, I want an open line of communication, but in the event I don't hear the call or I can't get to it, you can set how many rings. And then after that number of rings, it will go to KindredMIND, to your voice.
Got you. Yeah, I love that. I love how you've thought through every process of this. And I think that's when I am talking about care technology and the tools that we use, one of the things that I think is so important is to have that thoughtful process. And just in our conversation today, you can tell how much research you have done about dementia, because it's a totally different, so your technology isn't just based on like, let's make this easier for the caregiver. And it sounds like as much as, you were stressed out about the calls you weren't getting, this was initially also about how do I help my mom, not how do I stop getting these phone calls?
Yeah, no, that was my priority. That was making sure like I said that in the beginning, enmeshment. I've always been concerned about her welfare, about her well-being. And so again, this just carried on into my adult life naturally, that if I'm not able to answer, I know my mother and I know she's going to sit in like this state of fear and concern with no answers met. So that was my priority. And then of course, the byproduct of this product is that it also relieves me. So it relieves the caregiver. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we talked before. And as I've looked through KindredMIND that I've really just appreciated is so thoughtful, so well researched, a holistic view of everything that's going on. You've thought about the ethics and the AI of it all. You've worked through that process. You have a very clear way that you're using this technology, encouraging other people to use it in a way that benefits both the care receiver and the caregiver. I want to end on something that every caregiver needs to hear. Because I think this is another thing. We struggle sometimes with figuring out what tools to use and if we should. Is it cheating if we use a tool? Like all this kind of stuff. Is it fair? Is it really caregiving? But one of the reasons that this is so important is because when you're in the throes of it, when you're not always able to be present with your meetings and your family, and then you also aren't showing up for the person that you're caring for, that relationship begins to erode and erode and erode. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about how or what did building Kindred Mind give back to you in your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, to answer that in one sentence, it gave me back my relationship with my mom prior to the disease. So I found when it returned me to the state of where we once were. And actually, when she was that slow burn, as I mentioned, with the dementia, I found that I was adding more and more accommodations for her. I was the logistics of her life. So I was getting her to appointments. I was getting her cat to the cat appointments. I was ensuring that she was maintaining her friendships. I was getting her to the gym. We were doing groceries. I was helping her with her bill. It became everything. And so one of those was she was like calling constantly too. And then now that I have that reprieve, I have a little bit more time to return to myself, that now when I walk through the door to visit with her, I'm no longer carrying all of those unanswered calls, but I'm showing up as myself. And I really think that that's the version she needs of me. And I feel more connected because I'm not carrying all of those, concerns or worries. And one thing I meant to mention is with all those calls that I have missed using Kindred Mind, I get a summary. I get a summary and a log. So I'm never out of the know. So I can come through her door with knowledge of all of those calls, to little Coles notes of her mood, a summary of the conversation itself. And one further thing I want to note is with that dashboard and knowledge base that I mentioned to you, you can actually input trigger distress words. So with that mode being on cover for me, if there's, word like fallen or fire, whatever those are, and you can actually input your own, but there's the automatic generic ones, it will break through. It'll break through that mode. So all of this to say, now that I have Kindred Mind, I can go carry on with my own obligations during the day and not feel distracted or worrying and having something sit in the back of my mind, because I can see that summary of those calls that I've missed. And I know that if there's something pertinent, urgent, that it'll break through and I'll know in real time and I can take action in real time. But yeah, it almost sounds cliche, but it's brought us closer, because I will say with that slow burn and all those accommodations comes the resentment a little bit, because they're stealing pieces of yourself. They're stealing your time. They're stealing time away from your family, your kids. And so I'm getting all of that back. So now I'm back to myself and we have this healthier relationship because of it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. For the caregiver listening who's in the thick of it right now, the calls are coming, the guilt is building, they don't know how much longer they can handle it. What do you want them to know right now?
Yeah. So like you said, if you're in the thick of it and, some people field upwards of 100 calls a day, you can try Kindred Mind out for a 30-day free trial period. Try using the system to hear your voice after the professional, version of your voice. You can actually test it and have those calls to see how those calls are fielded based on the information that you input. I also want to note that these calls are all following the Alzheimer's Society of Canada's dementia-friendly guidelines. So everything is structured on those pillars of validation theory, simulation theory, and the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. But if you're in the thick of it, give it a try for 30 days. And yeah.
And they can go to, what's the website for them?
So KindredMIND.care.
Okay. KindredMIND.care. You can learn more, because we've tried to talk about everything, but there's so much more, so much more information about how it all works. And it sounds like there's a lot of ways for you to, there's videos and things that you can try. So go to KindredMIND.care. I will also put that in the description, and you can start your 30-day free trial. Kirstin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks, Jeanette. It was fun.
You know, you have built something that lets a mother always hear her daughter's voice. And I can't imagine anything more precious than that. And thanks for also naming the guilt the rest of us have been carrying. We appreciate you. And if you're listening today, if you're caring for someone with dementia, if your phone has rung 10 times today before lunch and you have answered some of them, you can answer others. And the ones you missed are still sitting somewhere in the back of your mind and on your phone. I want you to hear this. Those calls are not a burden. They are loved expressed. The only way the brain knows how to do that right now. And you deserve a way to answer every single one. And you can go to KindredMIND.care for that 30-day free trial, no charge for 30 days. And there are people who really understand exactly what you're carrying. So if this episode gave you something, please share it with another caregiver in your life. The one has been answering the phone from the shower, like I have before, for sure, from the edge of sleep, from every meeting she's tried to hold together. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel so that you never miss an episode. You can find more resources in the description, in the show notes, and at JeanetteYates.com. Until next time, feel good, not guilty.